Hockman.
Here.
Henning. Gorman.
Here.
Merkel.
Here.
Kelly. Here. Lieberman.
Here.
Stevens.
Here. Okay, we're having a workshop discussion tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to council members Henning and Kelly.
Well, the reason why we're here tonight, to workshop, was to discuss the plot of land that goes from Haber to Fox to National, and council's interest of maybe changing that to rural preservation. You know, we had asked for this to Amanda, and we just really wanted to get council's ideas on that. I know that some of us thought it was in the rural conservation district, and some of us, you know, thought differently, and it's been a couple of years since we've talked about it, so we figured we should address it with staff.
Same thing, but my idea too was when we had the plan, we looked at it and it was a whole plan. And a lot of times when you're looking at things as a whole, maybe you've missed or had a communication between what the segments are instead of the whole. If we could maybe look in the future and segment it out, because obviously it's a huge plan and it's covering a lot. And I know things change, time changes, it's not a Bible, as a resident had mentioned, and things are subject to change. So I think that's another way to look at it too.
I mean, I guess we now have the discussion with staff on ideas for a.
Well, I think I can speak for myself, but I think I can speak for the planning department as well, that, you know, we would not recommend changing the plan, given the amount of work that went into it, the amount of public input that went into it while it was developed. I mean, if that is what council decides to do, that's fine, that's your prerogative. I mean, but that's not something that staff would recommend.
For that one.
I wouldn't recommend amending the plan at all right now.
It's 11 acres, correct? And 3 of it cannot be built on, correct? It's bedrock. I mean, is that correct?
As I remember, and my memory's getting less as I get a little older, that when we had the merger commission in 1997, everything north of 40 was in the rural planning or the rural zoning. And now in the new plan, there's parts here and there that are no longer rural conservation areas. And the new plan changed what was, and I'll use the word promised, to those north that they would remain rural and go along with the merger. If we didn't have them, God only knows where we would be today. But as I recall, being on the merger commission and council, that was supposed to be rural planning commission, no, rural conservation the whole time.
So let me ask you this, to Jack and Seth, because, well, neither one of you were here at that time either, but I mean, is there any historical documents? I mean, Tim's recollection, you know, sure, is true to him. I don't know.
I think if you can bear with us for a second, we can bring some historical documents up and show you, kind of demonstrate this history of that particular area as well as everything north of 40. But while Seth's working with Ben to bring that up, and we have some handouts also that kind of show the history of some maps going back to 1980. So, you know, approximately 40 some years ago. I think what you'll find is that even back in 1980, there's a zoning map from 1984 that shows this corner zone for single-family residential, and you'll see about 50 to 75% of the land identified north of 40 in the land use plan or the zoning map identified for future development. Now, there was in I believe 97, there was a discussion with the township, and I know this based on articles that we found in the newspaper, that there was discussion about everything north of 40 going to rural conservation, and there was something that was passed at that time from Randolph Township. But the merger commission also stated, and Seth will be able to show you this here in a few minutes, where it says that if the village of Clayton and Randolph Township merged to become a city, we would move forward with the land use plans that were existing up until you develop new land use plans. And as you'll see, there was new land use plans that were not only discussed, but were approved and then adopted moving forward that calls for development in these certain areas. You'll see, I believe, by some of these maps that there's been very little changed in terms of what's designated for development in both the land use plan and the zoning code at this corner, as well as north of 40, except for, honestly, we've increased the level of rural conservation north of 40, which is something we've discussed many times before and we've said in different presentations. And I think you'll see that when you look at these maps. But I'm going to turn it over to Seth. So Seth can kind of give you the historical information from a planning point of view.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Mayor and council members. If I may, I have some handouts for y'all.
If you point it, no, that's off. That's on. If you point it towards over here.
That works.
Sometimes. Only when you need to.
Yeah.
Need to. I mean, you got it. Okay.
All right, thank you. So in anticipation of our discussion tonight, I did kind of a deep dive, and so I have some historical documents in my office that I've inherited. So from the Randolph Township standpoint, and really that's where the land that we're talking about originally was, I looked at the 1980 Comprehensive Land Use Plan. I actually have that in the office. I found a 1984 zoning map for the township. I found the 1990 Comprehensive Land Use Plan. And then I kind of looked at the merger study report, and Mr. Gorman, you were a part of that commission. And then for the city of Clayton, we passed a 1999 land use plan just a year into our, becoming a city. 2006, we have a proposed land use plan that was done as part of and in support of the Clayton Improvement District study that was prepared. We have a 2013 zoning map. That was the most recent map until council approved the new planning and zoning code and zoning map this year. 2018 Plan Clayton Regulating Plan, which you're all familiar with, and then the current 2021 zoning map. Next slide. So this is, and it's a picture, and you have that in your packet. It's a little fuzzy on the screen, I understand, but it's the 1980 comprehensive plan. And so the dividing line between the white areas and the darker areas on the map, north of 40 is Haber Road. So everything west of there is shown in 1980 Randolph Township as agricultural or vacant. To the east of Haber Road, you have a lot of, frankly, planned for residential development. Next slide. This one's really hard to see on the screen and probably hard in your packets as well, but this is the 1984 zoning map for Randolph Township. And what I found very interesting, and this is kind of that parcel national at Haber and Fox, that was actually zoned R1 for residential back in 1984. There's quite a bit of residentially zoned property north of 40 in Randolph Township back in the mid-'80s. Next slide. We move on to the 1990 Comprehensive Plan proposed land use. Again, the yellow is residential. So there wasn't maybe a whole lot of change between the 1980 proposed future land use and the 1990 proposed land use. But again, you can see there's a fair amount of residential that's planned for north of 40. Next slide.
Just so we're clear, can you use the pointer and kind of, or your pen to point to where Haber Road is, Haber and National.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Haber, then National, and then this is kind of that Fox
Okay.
quadrant right there. So, in the mid-90s, then we get into the merger, the beginnings of the talks of the merger. In 1994, I read in the Merger Commission's study or report that Randolph Township actually reached out to Inglewood, Union, and the village of Clayton to gauge interest in merging the communities into one governmental unit. And only Clayton responded favorably. Union said no. Inglewood denied that these conversations were going on. So what was left of the township at that time, they were struggling financially because of the annexation practices of both Inglewood and Union, who were annexing developable land into their communities, but leaving the roads and the plats for the township to maintain and provide services for. And so they were in a lot of trouble financially. And Clayton, I think, the village of Clayton realized that a merger with the township would be their best chance to grow, control growth, and to stop the encroachment of Union and Inglewood, who were both annexing land from the township at a pretty alarming rate. Residents of the village and township voted overwhelmingly in November of 1995 to form a commission to study a possible merger. Got the kind of the cover of the merger report and the members that were involved, the commission members that were involved. Next slide. So after months of meetings and careful study of the issues, the Merger Commission unanimously recommended to the residents of Randolph Township and the village that they should merge. The question was put to the voters in November of 1996, and of course the merger was approved, as we know. In November 1997, the voters elected the first municipality of Clayton's mayor and council members. And on January 1st, 1998, the township and village merged into and became the municipality of Clayton. The new council passed a flurry of legislation that first year, including the adoption of both the Village of Clayton and Randolph Township zoning resolutions, and both of their comprehensive plans, just kind of as a stopgap measure. But the city's first zoning code was approved in 2003, and our first comprehensive plan was approved in 1999. I put the excerpt, and the terms and conditions that were put before the voters for the merger. I think it's interesting to note in the zoning section and the land use section that it says they recommend the old codes and the old comprehensive plans kind of move forward for the interim until such time as the new council adopts its own zoning ordinance and its own comprehensive plan. I think the idea being that eventually things would change. The new city would adopt its own rules, regulations, its own planning. Next slide. So then we have our 1999 land use plan. It's our first as a city, our first comprehensive plan. And you look, and I'll point that out, you look north of 40, and Haber Road's actually right here. So one of the big ideas and impetuses in our first land comprehensive plan was a mixed-use town center. And that town center is centered around Haber, Fox, up to Sweet Potato Ridge Road, south of 40, kind of in the area where the village of North Clayton now is. Here is some residential, rural preservation residential, and then we've also got suburban residential, low density, all of it north of 40. So that was contemplated as far back as 99, our very first comprehensive plan. Next slide.
But no multifamily. No multifamily up there?
You have a mixed-use town center where I think all of that was contemplated. And I've got some early drawings, and it showed townhomes, flats, multifamily type housing.
Mixed use, when you say mixed use, you're accepting that multifamily is a part of that. That's multifamily is always included with mixed use.
And so then some years went by, and in order to encourage development, the city of Clayton passed the Clayton Improvement District, number 1. There were some impact fees that were placed on, quite a large amount of acreage, and that's shown in the drawing up on the slide right now, the Clayton Improvement District boundary area. So from that ordinance that set up the Clayton Improvement District, a year or two later, council got into the idea of a zoning code section to talk about the types of developments and densities and things of that nature. It was referred to Planning Commission, and a consultant was hired. It was McBride Dale Clarion at the time. They put together, for the effort of creating standards for the Clayton Improvement District, they put together a proposed land use plan. And I think what's interesting about the proposed land use plan, and it's kind of consistent with the town center that was in our land use plan at the time, but at Haber and National, you've got a combination of residential and commercial development. Down at the village of North Clayton, you've got the mixed-use town center, as it shifted down to that location. Next slide.
I have a question on that last slide.
Sure.
So the Clayton, I'm going to ask you to repeat something because I'm not aware of that. So you said, is there like some kind of money being put into this now? This Clayton Improvement District?
So when projects develop in the improvement district, there are impact fees that are charged to the developer or the builder.
So there's no impact fees going there now?
I mean, I think they've been collected over the years, but as, let's say, new house in the village of North Clayton is built, they pay a $1,333 impact fee. But there is legislation that dictates what that fee is. And it's been reduced over time because, again, to encourage development, but also, I think the infrastructure developments that have occurred out there have sort of been paid for, at this point. So, good question. Next slide. This is the zoning map from 2013. I couldn't find an older one. We approved our first zoning code in 2003. I'm not sure how much, if any, the zoning map would have changed, but just before we approved our new planning and zoning code and map, this was the zoning that we had. And again, the residential plan districts and other things were zoned north of 40. Next slide. And this is the plan. Clayton regulating plan should look familiar to everybody. The green areas would be agricultural. The different yellows, oranges are residential. I have kind of highlighted, again, the Haber, Fox, sweet potato area. And we have 2 special planning areas there. B, which is at Haber and Fox, is Clayton Commercial Center. It's a mix of residential, flex, mixed-use parks. And then the Sweet Potato Ridge Road, it's the Winger Village special planning area. And it's a mix of flex and residential uses as well, shown in our current regulating plan. Next slide.
I got another question, I'm sorry. This one's actually kind of part of the discussion part, I guess, in this case, I guess for Kenny and Tina. I'm looking at this, the 2018 regulating plan. I mean, if you go up Haber and you look at like Warner Village, you see where that is on Haber? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, is that something that, what is that different than what we're talking about here, or?
Yeah, I think I called it Winger Village, but I was talking about Warner Village. Yeah, it's a
Warner
mix
Village.
of flex uses, which are defined, kind of on the.
So the flex uses are right by the parks. On top, the 2 little rectangles.
Yeah, I mean, again, illustrative, but yes, there's flex, which is kind of the pinkish, and then there's parks, and then the residential. And I think the idea there was just some level or measure of transitional zoning, you know, in the different special planning areas, and that's kind of what you're seeing.
So pockets of apartments could go in those little rectangles?
I'm trying to remember on flex uses, I believe that's right. I think mixed use contemplated the same.
Yeah, and the thing, it is a variety of different types of residential uses. The important thing, and sometimes we got caught up with this in previous cases, it doesn't have to be laid out with these rectangles. This is just illustrative, just showing what the consultant was showing as a possible layout for a community, and that's what it was. The reason that they were proposing, we talked about this area along Sweet Potato because if you remember, Mr. Gorman, you brought up the fact that it was residential up there and there's supposed to be rural conservation. And Mr. Gillian pointed out that in the past, the zoning up there was already single-family residential at that time. And we weren't really changing the zoning district at all. This was just an attempt to create that sense of community that the residents with the surveys and all the other types of feedback we got, they were looking for sense of community with the possibility of parks. If people wanted to have transitional housing from, you know, single family to townhouses to patio-style homes, the whole concept is to be able to have a community where multiple types of housing options are provided and be able to have open green space and have walkability. And that was that whole sense of community that we talked about throughout the Plan Clayton process. And so but again, the rectangles, you know, the grid-like pattern for the streets, that doesn't say that that's how it has to be, that's just an example of how that particular community could be laid out.
So that could all be multifamily, flex use?
It could be. The thing that you also have to remember is this, and I'm not trying to step on Seth's toes, is that all of that along Sweet Potato, down Haber, it's all included in the Clayton Improvement District. And part of the Clayton Improvement District is that it has to come, anything over 5 acres has to go through a PUD process, which means that it has to go through the Plan Commission, and then it has to come back before City Council. So anything that's in the Clayton Improvement District has to come before City Council for consideration. And the Plan Commission and City Council get to decide if that meets the intent of what Plan Clayton was, you know, how it was adopted. It's not that a developer can come in and say, this is what I want to do. I want to put 1,000 apartment units, and staff goes, approved. That's in the Clayton Improvement District. That was the foresight that city leaders did back in the early 2000s by creating the Clayton Improvement District because they wanted to have control over how the development occurred. However, they wanted, and I wasn't there, but by all the documents that we have at our disposal, development was planned for north of 40. That was also one of the reasons why we have a utility agreement with the City of Union, because we don't have utilities north of 40. City of Union does, and that's why we have a utility agreement that was entered into to be able to provide sanitary and water to for future development, as well as our existing residents.
We turned it down once up there, Jack, coming from Union to bring water and sewer into Clayton, and we turned them down.
And that's fine, you may have turned it
The
down
neighbors
once,
wanted it, but.
but you still have it, but you guys still did it, eventually. We have a utility agreement with the City of Union.
We did it?
Yeah, City of Clayton.
Oh, City of Clayton did it, okay.
Yeah, City of Clayton and City of Union.
Are you talking about the planning commission or?
I'm talking about City Council.
City council, I don't recall.
Yeah,
If you keep talking about these people wanted parks and everything else on the plan Clayton, but I remember a number of them saying that the thing they like best about Clayton is the rural character of part of Clayton. And we're trying to take that away from them.
I couldn't agree with you more. What I'm gonna ask Seth to do is, after he finishes this, let's go back and look at the zoning map and the land use map from even the 80s and the 90s, and look at what our zoning map looks like today. And
I'm very familiar. We started developing Savannah Hill Estates in 1977, Jack.
Okay.
And didn't finish until 93. In 77, Englewood turned us down for water, so we had to annex to Englewood. And, you know, I hunted rabbits where we're sitting today. It was a nursery.
my point is that you said we're trying to take away rural conservation areas. My
North
point is that-
of 40, excuse me.
My point is that I'm gonna prove to you that we've added. That's my point. And after Seth's done with this, we're gonna look at the maps.
And the other thing I have to say is, you know, we talk about a survey with residents, like, we had extremely high participation. We had like 200 participants, and I guess we should probably know how many of those participants lived north of 42, because if it was all from this part of Clayton, that, they can't really speak to what should go on in the northern part, in my opinion.
Well, I think that there were members of the community north of 40 who participated. I know Mr. Landis participated in the planning process.
I think also to that point, because I think I remember Jack talking about this prior. I mean, we put out a lot of calls for things for people to participate. And I mean, you know, if they didn't participate, I don't know what you can do. I mean, I don't know if we can, you know, if we need to go up there and knock on their door, maybe that is it. But if we put it in the newspaper, our website, you know, we beg people to get involved in stuff here every week, and we see what we get. And the real thing is, no one's really, I'm really stretching here with the words, but, you know, no one seemed to care much until all of a sudden we have a great deal, it appears. But these certain folks, I get it. I get it if they live right beside it, they want to keep a big field. I understand that. But where were you when we were talking to all those people? We went to, I mean, I was involved in a lot of the stuff, and I know all of us were. We went to Meadowbrook. We met at different places. We had people come here. I mean, I don't know what else, you know, other than, short of just going there and saying, knocking on the door and saying, hey.
Everything that we did, we had surveys online, we had hard copy of surveys in here. We had people set up at the YMCA, at Sinclair. We had it in the Day and Daily News. It was in our newsletter. We did news stories on the local news. It was on the radio. It was,
I remember you guys did a lot of work. I'm just saying.
so, I mean, the question is, what else are we supposed to do to get people's feedback?
Yeah, well, and this was 3 years ago. There's a lot of new residents up there too that weren't able to have any type of feedback, and they
Every
moved into.
community has new residents on an annual basis, but you can't, on a land use plan, you're recommended to do a land use plan every 10 to 20 years. We spent close to $100,000 on that project. We spent $125,000 on the zoning code. We spent 4 years working on those two things together. We were begging people to participate. If we go out every single year to do a survey to try to amend our land use plan, we're not going to get anything accomplished. We have to continue to build. The purpose of a land use plan is long-term planning. That's what we're doing. And if we go back every 2 years to do surveys because we have new residents, we're never going to get anything accomplished. I mean, it's impossible.
Also, if we want to debate public participation, we just had an election. If everyone, the percentage was not good overall. That was, you know, so at some point, you take what you get as far as public participation. You know, it was down, I did the math, it was down 1,400 votes from 4 years ago. So, you know, take that into consideration at some point. It's like, it's our job to take what is given to us. That's all I have to say about kind of public participation, because we've done everything I think we can to try to get that in.
So
I don't think all of the people in Plan Clayton that said they liked the rural area, the rural feel of Clayton, were from north of 40. There's a lot of them that lived right in this neighborhood and any other neighborhood in Clayton that you want to talk about, enjoy being able to ride up through an area like that, as well as out where Dennis lives, out west of
Absolutely
town.
agree. And as being a staff person who was attracted to working at the city of Clayton, and then someone that decided to move his family out to the city of Clayton, there's absolutely an attraction to the rural part of the city of Clayton. And that's something that, again, will demonstrate that we've added that rural conservation to the city of Clayton in terms of zoning. However, I'll also say this. Part of the challenge to developing any type of land use plan is weighing everybody's opinions. And there are plenty of people that think that the area of north of 40 should be agricultural. There are also plenty of people that think we need to develop more and to bring more resources into the city. How do you weigh those two options?
In that location, though? I mean, in that segment, about bringing in that area?
What area?
The 11 acres we're talking about? People, you had that approach with people?
I had no one tell me at the time of Plan Clayton that the 11 acres shouldn't be developed.
Jack,
The land use plan from 1999 identified that for development. No one ever said we needed to change that. City council members didn't say that, planning commission members didn't say that, staff didn't say that, and the residents didn't say that. That was identified as a development site in the future. Everyone had opportunities to say what could be changed. No one ever identified that corner to be changed, ever.
And we're talking about Haber and 40, correct? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because let's be honest, this was brought about by Redwood, so let's just get that out. There was what, about 30-some acres that we were looking at rezoning a couple months ago? It was, yeah, I remember it was around, yeah, low 30. So we're talking about even just a third of that here. I'm kind of a little confused at this discussion is in comparison. We're talking about a smaller stretch here, where then the argument a couple months ago was, well, this is too much for this area in general. Now we're just talking about, an 11-acre strip.
I think Seth and Jack, you'll agree with me when I say the biggest argument in planning is infill zoning or urban stretch, or excuse me, rural stretch, urban stretch into the rural areas. And I don't think that in years we've done anything to infill zoning, and there's a lot of places in Clayton that you can do infill zoning in. Well, let's go up on Winger Road. You got 3 farms up there, you got 1 plat, and there's, well, where'd we get the pumpkins at? Wetzel's, right? How many acres has he got? And we destroyed the house on the corner when we put water up to the school because we ruined their well.
So Dave Wetzel has approximately 33 acres, and as you know, because I know you developed Savannah Hills, it takes 2 people to do a development usually. You have to have a property owner that's willing to sell, and you have a developer that's willing to pay the price that the property owner wants for their land. And the reason we haven't had more development along Wanger Road, and I've spoken with Dave Wetzel about 4 times in the last 12 months regarding selling his land for development, is Dave Wetzel cannot come to an agreement with a developer on the price of his land. Now, with that being said, we do have Wanger Village and we have other things going up there that there are opportunities for future infill there. But infill development's a lot easier when you have site control. When you don't have site control,
Are we
it's
working
easier
towards
said
any
than
of
done.
that?
What's that?
Are we working towards that?
Site control?
Yeah.
Well,
Other than down on North Main Street, Jack, excuse me, I know we are down there.
well, we are a small community with limited resources. If I had an open pocketbook and the city of Clayton had millions upon millions of dollars, I think we would obviously identify areas that we could purchase land for future development, but we don't.
Well, the young Wetzel boy asked me when his father sold the land across the street, he said, do you think that they'll want our property next? We'd like to sell it. And how many years ago has that been, Jack? That was before you were here, I believe.
Absolutely. Like I said-
Westbrook, what's the plat called? Westbrook Manor or
Wanger Village?
Winger Village?
Listen, I've
Westbrook,
talked to
yeah.
Dave. I mean, you can ask Dave. Dave and I talk all the time. I know how much Dave wants for his land. I know how much is being offered for his land.
I have no idea.
They needed kind of, well, Dave wants more than what people are paying for.
I don't doubt that, everybody does.
Well,
I imagine Mr. Landis did too, wanted more than Redwood wanted to pay when they first came to town.
I don't know. You'd have to ask Mr. Landis.
I don't know that, I don't know if you do or not. But all I'm saying is that there is a lot of area in Clayton that can be filled in before we go to the farmland, or the rural conservation area, whatever we want to call it, but let's face it, it's country.
We're getting a little off here
Yeah,
because.
but I mean, I think that's probably, I mean, I agree with you. There's a lot of area between, but I mean, if you know someone who wants to buy the land, then let's make a deal. But that's not something that we can do. Our council can't do that and our staff can't do that.
Can Seth finish the presentation up real quick?
It's just what you promote, though, is what I'm saying. Are we promoting the infill, or are we promoting north of 40? That's the question.
Real quick, I'll answer that. I'm sorry, Seth.
No, go.
What we're promoting is the city of Clayton. That's what we promote. And when developers contact me, I give them contact information for people that I know are trying to sell land. I have pushed more developers to Dave Wetzel than I have pushed to anywhere else. Because I know Dave wants to sell. And I'm hoping that they can work out an agreement. But to answer your question, we promote the city of Clayton as an entity, as an entire community. And that's what we promote. And then one of the most difficult things about development is the fact that in our position, unless we own the land, we are trying to convince a party over here to sell their land for a reduced price, and we're trying to convince a private developer on this side to pay less for land, and we have nothing to do. But we're trying to convince two sides of the spectrum to spend more or accept less. And that's the most difficult thing.
Well, there's a very popular subject, or something I'll call it plat, right across the street from David's house, which was his father's farm at one point in time, Winger Village.
Yep.
And I can't imagine that, not the same builder, but I can't remember his name, he was in here 48 times
Inverness is the one that built it out.
before he got started on the deal.
Mhm.
But,
Well, stay tuned on that one.
I would just like to mention, I mean, if we're talking about north of 40, Haber, National, and Fox, I mean, that's 35 acres that have been zoned for residential since the mid-'80s. We had to rezone to Plan District with the Redwood Plan because it was contemplating commercial and multifamily, but that was a very good fit with the Clayton Commercial Center, you know, that was in Plan Clayton. And with the second plan, not only were we gonna get 1,800 lineal feet of a bike path, we were gonna get a light at National and Haber, and the city was gonna get 11 acres. I mean, you talk about site control, that would have been 11 acres that we had control over.
we're still working on that, aren't we, Seth, to get the light at Haber and 40?
I think eventually, yes, but that, I mean, as far as the Redwood development, that one's off the table, so.
Yes, I can tell you there's no plans for a light at National and Haber right now.
That would be future.
Half a dozen times to the state for money to put it there, and somebody, at one of the meetings, the traffic engineer said that there's definitely a need for a light there. Can't hear me, Dennis. That's been one of my problems all over my life, is being heard, Dennis. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. That's never been a problem of mine, is being heard. I've had a lot of them, but that's not one of them.
And I'll just go to the last slide, which is our current zoning map. I guess that's up already. And really, the area that Jack's talking about, where we've sort of grown the rural conservation is the northeast quadrant along County Line Road and kind of north of Phillipsburg Union. There's some more rural conservation there now than what Randolph Township had back in the 80s and 90s, and then in the earlier days of the city of Clayton. So we've definitely expanded rural conservation area. And that's really all we have, but you know, happy to stick around for any additional questions or discussion points.
Well, I guess I kind of want to revert back to a question I have. Again, I'm going to go back to Kenny and Tina just because you brought this up. And just try to help me understand. I mean, what is it that you don't like about that corner being developed? I get it, you know, like Tim said, you know, it's nostalgic and, you know, you may not want to go, you know, you like to drive out there and see the fields and things, but I mean, what is the real reason?
It's not that. I'm listening to the residents. They don't want apartments. First of all, they didn't want Redwood,
fine
the
with
ones that
single
we talked to. Single family or estate homes, they were fine with. I'm listening to their needs, and that's my reasoning.
I just don't understand why we can't make that area single family or estates or something that excludes multifamily.
Well,
I think
we're
one of-
talking,
Go ahead.
so what are we talking about? Rural conservation, would that include single family? If we have that, because we're saying, well, we want to keep that rural conservation, now suddenly, but we can put single family there. What is it? You know, does single family fit into rural conservation if we do that protection in that space?
So I think one of the issues that you could run up against would be a takings of Mr. Landis's rights to that property. And I don't know if Martina, if you could kind of expand on that with the Sixth Circuit.
think Dennis had brought this up last year when we were talking about the short-term rentals and the takings and whatnot. And so actually, just on August 25th of this year, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is our district, so it's binding authority, had a similar case before them, not with short-term rentals, but with sort of a similar situation to what you're talking about, where a trust owned by a family had 16 acres. They had a developer. They wanted to change the zoning to a more dense zoning, so they could obviously put in more single-family homes. Long story short, the city denied the rezoning request. They filed suit. They alleged, a takings and equal protection. And essentially, I think the most important part of this case for me, it's still pending because the Sixth Circuit reversed the lower court's decision and remanded it. The lower court initially found in favor of the city and deferred to the discretion of the city, that the city has, this is local zoning, it's up to you. And what was interesting to me is the appellate court, which was sort of in my mind a departure from the past precedents, said, well, not so fast. We're not going to just entirely rely upon the discretion of the city in making that decision. We want to see if there's actual evidence that the property owners have to support their takings claim. So that was sort of the important part to me, was that they were saying, well, we're not going to dismiss it just yet. We're going to give them their day in court and see what evidence they have. And the equal protection argument was basically they were saying, okay, well, they relied on the comprehensive land use plan and said, you've had this land use plan in effect since 2011. You've approved 9 other similar rezoning requests, but you denied ours. So you're treating us differently than you treated these 9 other ones. So the court basically said, okay, let's throw it back and you show us what evidence you have about that. And looking on court, on the website today on Pacer, they're still in court. Looked like they had some settlement talks that didn't appear to go anywhere from what I saw. And the case was filed in January of 2020, and they've got deadlines into July of 2022 now. So it was kind of interesting to me that it seemed like the Sixth Circuit was saying, we're not going to immediately throw this out. We're going to take a look at what evidence they have to actually see what happened here. And if there was a takings, a regulatory taking, meaning basically you deprive them of the use of their land without paying them for it. And basically what the lower court said was, we think that you don't have a property interest in future zoning. So you don't have an interest in that future zoning that you requested, and the appellate court said, well, let's see. That was what was interesting about that case. So I just wanted to point that out, and Amanda had asked me to take another look at that and discuss that, just so you can, factor that in as you will, as you're thinking about it. It'll be interesting to see how that one comes out, but I don't expect a decision on that one until probably late 22 or 2023. So.
If I could add to that, in the paper today, Springboro was just sued for something very similar to what happened here.
Acres?
I don't recall. It might have been.
It was 165 acres, so kind of similar, but not entirely.
Not in the amount of acres, but in the procedure as to what was used, where the city council basically overturned a staff recommendation, overturned a commission recommendation, planning commission recommendation, and so they were sued for that. Now, I don't know whether they're going to win or lose. The point I'm making is that I hesitate to use this word, but this is a little bit like spot zoning, where if you zone something for particular people, a particular group of people, then you're really kind of in the danger area, because your zoning has to be, my understanding of it is that your zoning has to be for the benefit of the city. Right, and and so you just have to be careful, because this is really, it's a really legal area, which can be problems and can be more than what it's worth. And I say that because I'm not sure why we're having this discussion brought up, it didn't pass, and so the project isn't going there, the development isn't going there. So why do we have to change our entire plan? And I think I know where it emanated from. It was my big mouth, where, you know, I was making the argument that it's consistent with our plan, and that's when they said, oh, okay, let's change the plan. If there is
Amend.
something that is offered to go there, then, and we don't like it, you know, we can still stop it. So I'm not sure why we want to change the entire plan.
I would have to say, part of it, I mean, we're not changing the entire plan, so that's not what we want to do. We want to amend one part. But if staff is working for the entire city, I mean, if staff is doing development for the entire city, like they just said, that who is to say if, you know, if a multifamily wants to come in there again, staff is gonna be okay with that and move forward with taking it to planning commission and then us. If we amend that part, it enables staff to say, we can't do that there.
Well, even if it were amended, if council decides to do that, and it is amended, and it is changed to rural conservation, if the developer comes in, we tell them, you know what, it doesn't fit the zoning, but they say, we don't care, we still wanna try, it's still gonna go through the process. I mean, we can't stop them from going through the process. Now, planning commission can say no, staff can say no, council can say no, but it will not prohibit them from asking.
Your recommendation, say, it doesn't fit with the plan, if we were to amend it. If we don't amend it, staff's recommendation will say, it goes with the plan.
Yeah, but Kenny, the point I'm trying to make is it didn't make a difference. The staff said that, the planning commission said that, and it didn't get through. So why do we need to change a plan which could invite, frankly, if I were the Landis's attorney, we're on the record, I don't want to say that, but what I would say is that we're inviting scrutiny when we don't need to. Is that?
Planning commissions, if the staff, they don't recommend it,
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is it didn't matter. The planning commission voted for it, staff recommended it, we didn't pass it. We still have that authority. So why do you want to change the plan, which is just going to invite scrutiny on us?
amend the plan just for that one section is what Councilmember Kelly and I.
Yeah, I know, amend, change it,
When you say change, you make it sound like it's changing the entire plan, which we don't want to do.
okay, I'll use your term, amend the plan, which is inviting scrutiny. It doesn't, the bottom line is the same. And I just don't, good idea to invite that kind of scrutiny when the Landises have been relying upon this, for years.
Okay. Can I get a word in here? My finger's getting tired. I do now. Several years ago, there was a parcel of property, I think it was on Sweet Potato. They wanted to subdivide one parcel and build another house. And the people that lived on that little section of property did not want the additional house being built. I think, Amanda, you might have been here at the time when this was going down. Well, anyway, they wanted to do this, and the.
It was about 4 years ago.
And came forward, and it came to the council, and essentially for them to prove that the subdividing of a parcel. And the neighbors didn't want it, but, yes. The neighbors didn't want it, but the landowner wanted to do it, he was very emphatic about doing it, and we turned it down. So his recourse was he went downtown to the court, and the action was it got reversed, and essentially he got his house built. So that is essentially what we could potentially be looking at. The one real concern I have, I'm sensitive to the issues what both people are discussing, but it comes down to what was mentioned by Dennis, is that you have a landowner who has a parcel of ground who potentially sometime in the future may decide to sell it. Now we decide to come in and change how he potentially can use that land based on, we decide we want to rezone it. He hasn't requested a rezoning of his property. So now we are essentially taking his rights away from how he's going to use his land. I could well imagine somebody basically coming to this body essentially saying, fine, I'll see you in court, and they'd win. That'd be my guess. And quite frankly, it comes down to the person who has the property and to how they feel about what they're going to do moving forward. I think we can make recommendations and suggestions in terms of how or what to be built there. Let's get away from that little parcel of ground, because it's a fire point. Any parcel of ground, anybody wanting to build something, if it fits within the zoning, I mean, only thing we can do is make sure that it's a good fit within the framework and definitions of the zoning as far as designed. If they wish to change zoning to something else, then it comes forward essentially, you want to request the change of zoning and have it be approved. You know, that's where we have an opportunity essentially to change zoning. I don't think we have the right to go up to, in this case, a person essentially tell them, well, you can't use your land for that, we're gonna change it. And basically whip it out from underneath them. This is some of the concerns I heard from people in terms of when this land use plan was being devised, that the city could come in and basically change zoning as they saw fit. And I really think something you approach it very, very carefully before essentially they so-called open the Pandora box of making changes. Once you do it, what's to stop you from doing it again, just because? And I just think we have to play it very, very carefully and not take special case.
So when it was R1 in 1984, when it was changed again in 1999 to mixed use,
We're talking two different things, and that's the reason I came up, because you guys are talking two different things. So the mixed-use classification in the 99 land was the land use designation for future land use. The R1 single-family designation is what the current zoning is. You're talking about two separate documents, and that's something that, and I wanted to clarify that, because you're talking about amending the land use plan. You can amend the land use plan, which I'm strongly against. However, the zoning district is still single-family residential there. Mr. Landis could still put single-family residential units there as long as, again, if it's over 5 acres, he has to come before Planning Commission and City Council and do a PUD, because that's what the Clay Improvement District mandates. But to call it, you know, you said rural conservation. That's the zoning classification. The land use classification for the Plan Clayton document is agriculture. So, I mean, you can amend it to be agriculture. That zoning's still single-family residential. Now, if you're going to rezone Mr. Landis's property from single-family to rural conservation, that's a whole nother step too. And so I wanted to clarify that you guys have kind of been, and I know, trust me, I understand zoning definitions, all that stuff is complicated, but you guys are kind of using both languages as one thing. And
you're the expert on this.
They're separate things, and we got to remember that.
So you just said, and I tried, and it slipped my mind, it's been a long week. It's R1 now, but it could be.
It's single-family residential. I forget what.
But you said it could be changed to ag and zoning, or not?
No, what I'm saying is, you keep saying we want to amend the land use plan for rural conservation.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a rural conservation district in the land use plan. It's agriculture. So you can amend the land use plan. So it's no longer the Clayton Commercial Center, and it's now the agricultural designation. That piece of land is still zoned single-family residential. Just because you amend the land use plan, it doesn't change the zoning district at all.
How much are you against that?
Changing the zoning?
Yeah, from commercial to what you just said.
Are you asking for the land use or the zoning? I don't think we should amend the land use plan because we spent 2 years and over $75,000 and countless hours
And I
trying to
believe
get.
it'd be,
What's that?
be the zoning.
The zoning? I don't think the city should ever go in and rezone a person's piece of property without the person wanting it and asking us to. I think that's just from a staff perspective.
Legally, can we even do that? Not that I don't think we should, but.
Well, that's the part I was saying. It's like we should not approach doing anything that says we are going to go in and take someone's property essentially and to rezone it from one designation to another. Right now, it's currently zoned as R1, correct?
It's RSD, residential.
I mean, whatever its designation is, that's the way it shows up on the county auditor's books.
Which is how it's been shown since 1984 at a minimum as single-family residential
So
on the zoning map.
I'm just saying, bad business to go in, essentially go in and say, okay, we're gonna rezone this to be commercial. Or whatever, B3 for commercial or whatever for designation for zoning, just to make something up. I would, unless they specifically want that to happen.
Unless the property owner wanted to, and that.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So the zoning code, the zoning map, that gives you a list of uses that you can use on that piece of property currently. The land use plan gives you a framework on how the city's gonna grow long-term. And that gives you options and potentials for future growth. That's the reason you have a land use plan, and that's the reason you have a zoning code. It's two separate things. It's complicated. But that's the reason we came through when there was an application for the Redwood project. They were asking for a rezoning, and then they were asking for a preliminary approval for a development plan. There were two different things. They were asking for the rezoning so they could do what they wanted to do. Staff looked at it and referred to the land use plan and said, this fits into what the land use plan calls for long-term. If it would have been a single-family residential development, and they came in and they said, we want to do 125 single-family units, because it was over 5 acres, we still would have had to come through, but it wouldn't have been for a rezoning because, well, it would be for a rezoning because it'd be going through a PUD then, but we would say it's consistent with what this land's already zoned for, but because of the Clayton Improvement District legislation, we have to come back for a PUD, and now we're asking for approval. It's different things, and it's complicated, it's complex, but the reason staff feels so strongly about this is because of the complexity of the legal issues, and we're trying to keep, the city in the best position to develop long-term without getting ourselves in trouble.
The PUD to not having multifamily there, or is that problematic?
Can I
That way, I mean,
jump on that just for a second? I think you're focusing on this multifamily issue. I don't know why you're doing that. We don't have very many apartments in Clayton. I don't think anyone's saying we want to make a community of apartments, but I think if we start excluding people like that and say, well, we don't want multifamily or whatever it is, we don't want mansions, or we don't want tract houses, whatever it is, I think we start to close the door. And I think that circles back to kind of what Jack was saying. They're trying to sell the city. We want doors open. Yeah, if it doesn't fit, we have the option to say no, but I don't want to turn people away that might have interest in our city. And I think if we start putting exclusions on what people can do at certain areas, I think that really puts a damper on what they're going to be able to do. Again, just like Dennis said, we always have the option to say no, but to just go out there and say, well, we don't want any multifamilies here. I think if you look at, and Seth, I think probably talked much more intelligently than me about this, but if you look at healthy, growing cities, they have a diversity of housing. It's not Huber Heights where they're all brick, 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranches. No city does that now. They have lofts, they have condos, they have houses, they have apartments. They have other types of housing out there, and that way we can attract young people, we can attract college students, we can have people like my mother gives her a place to get out of her house to go live to an apartment like Redwood would have been perfect for her. She can afford it, and it's perfect for her. But to shut her out, the day it was turned down, I was talking to Greg about his father, and we both agreed it would have been perfect, but not now. He could go live somewhere else. He's got a big house, and it's tough to take care of when you're that age. And you have to have an option, and I don't want the option to be they move to Tip City. I'd rather have them here.
But we're not talking exclusions for all apartments, because we just approved how many in North Clayton with Windsor and then the Grand Villas. So we didn't say that we don't want apartments anywhere.
Well, you're the one that keeps saying multifamily.
On that one piece of land, not in the whole city.
Where we wanted to conserve it, you're saying rural conservation, which I kind of take that designation as ag, as open. But then it's like, well, we'll accept single family, which would actually probably, if I could defer to the experts on this, that would actually cause a little bit more traffic than, say, an apartment like Redwood, wouldn't it? Potentially? I mean, it probably would be similar, but,
I mean, we would have to look at traffic studies,
right,
how many
yeah.
houses there are, but that property there is zoned for single-family residential
yeah.
today.
So I kind of go back to my question earlier of, are we wanting to keep this rural the way it is? Is that what we're trying to get to? Or, if it's not that, because the landscape of something like a Redwood is going to be fairly similar to a suburban plat like what I live into. You drive through those, they kind of have a little bit of a similar feel. So that's my question here. And again, but it's zoned already for single family. So what would that be?
To answer your question, I think, Brandon, you were the one that asked, so according to the charter, you can, ordinances establishing, amending, revising, changing, or repealing zoning classifications, district uses, or regulations may be initiated three ways. By a member of council, in response to a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and in response to a recommendation from the Planning Commission, in response to a request for a zoning change. So that last one I would interpret as when the property owner comes in and requests a zoning change. Of course, then the Planning Commission can request a zoning change. A member of council can request a zoning change. So legally, to answer your question, could you initiate it? Yes, but I would also say that I think Greg and Dennis made valid points about inviting a legal challenge without having a request from a property owner initiating it. So there is that risk.
And I know that Councilmember Kelly and I, we went to not be in the situation where we were last time of having a staff recommendation and then having a contentious meeting. I think we would rather have that one plot of land. We're not saying no to multifamily in the whole city. I think it's that one piece we are saying we would prefer to have no multifamily there. And that's what we both agree on. Just that one piece, not anywhere else. The only conversation is that one piece.
And I think, Jack, if I'm correct, I think what you were saying, if I'm understanding you, in order to do that, you need a zoning change, correct? Right.
Okay,
I'll move we close the workshop.
motion, we close